morning. Does anybody feel a little bit more full than they did when they walked in here this morning? Anyone, just a little bit? All right. So I know the anticipation has been building, like, okay, if Mike's in Israel and he's halfway around the globe, who's stepping in this morning? And then you see the youth pastor walk out and you're like, oh, the youth pastor is great, here we go. I only had to wait for Mike to go halfway around the globe to get this opportunity, so thank you, Mike, for walking where Jesus walked. I don't know about you, but I'm excited for him to get to walk in the actual footsteps of where Jesus was, and I'm excited for us when he comes back and he walks us in those footsteps where Jesus got to walk. It's going to be a great time when he comes back and he's able to share all of those things that he was able to experience. But this week, you're stuck with me. And as Mike asked me several weeks ago or months, I don't remember how long ago it was, if I would speak one of these 2 weekends. It was either going to be last weekend or this weekend. I started looking at it and I realized that there is this really big Hallmark holiday that falls in between those 2 weekends. In college, I had a group of friends that they didn't like this holiday at all, so they decided to rename it. They made t-shirts, they had parties, they would go out to eat and everything to celebrate Vomit Day. But for the rest of us, we celebrated Valentine's Day, and this past week we got to do that. So as I was praying and I was preparing and God was giving me words to say and all these different things, with Valentine's Day kind of in the back of my mind, as you know, I know that's going to be going on either right before or right after I speak. God started using that to prepare a message, and I was preparing this message for it, and then Valentine's Day came along on Tuesday morning, and we sat at the breakfast table with my family. It was myself, my wife, and our 2 beautiful little daughters, and my wife and children proceeded to pull out cards and chocolates and beef jerky, because I prefer that over chocolate, and they're giving me these gifts, and all of a sudden, I realize I forgot Valentine's Day. Like, here I am preparing a message knowing that Valentine's Day is in the middle and it's factoring into what I'm going to talk about. And I forgot to do anything for my wife and children for Valentine's Day. I tried to play it off, and that evening I took them to dinner and a movie. Like, yeah, I totally had that planned weeks ago. But I had to admit to my wife, I was like, I'm not going to lie. For the first time in 14 years that we've celebrated Valentine's Day together, I blew it this year, and I got nothing. So I told her that, and then last night, because I knew I was going to get the chance to speak, and she's in here on Saturday nights, Sunday morning she's over in children's ministry, and she's serving in there, but I was able to last night serenade her and try and make up for it, and our tech team did awesome, and they turned the whole stage like red with red lights, and I walked over to the piano, and I played her a song, and it was all dark out here, and there was a spotlight on me, and they even went like super over the top, and they had me on the camera on the screens with a big heart around me while I'm singing. And then Paul Searcy, being the amazing man that he is, found my wife right out there sitting kind of in this area, put a spotlight on her in the middle of a dark room and a video camera in her face that she's trying to hide from with my oldest daughter. And Paul's around here like, no, you're not hiding from this thing. And so he's got her up on the screen with that heart right around it. And I was able to kind of make up for Valentine's Day. You guys aren't going to experience that because I already did it. And it wouldn't be nearly as cool if I did it again. But I know that there are a lot of men in here that need some good love advice. And so this morning, I would like to give you a little bit of love advice. And women, some of this is for you too. So I want you to listen very closely. And there's no better way, in my mind at least, to communicate love than through music. So we're going to use music this morning. Brad Paisley, the amazing singer, songwriter, and love guru that he is, wrote these words that I'd like to share with you. And pay very close attention to this, men, especially those of you who are not married yet. There ain't a woman in the world that wants to hear the words yes. When she asks you if she think that she looks chubby in that dress. And if she cooks all day, you better eat it with a smile. It doesn't matter if it tastes just like bad gravy on a Goodyear tire. Well, it's the very same thing that she does for you. when she doesn't bring up the 15 pounds that you need to lose. And every time she runs her fingers through your hair, and she says she kind of likes the way there's not as much of it there. Oh, yeah, all right. So you bend the truth? Yeah. Well, that's something that you'll have to get used to, 'cause that's love. You'll see, we all commit a little bit of perjury, but that's no crime if you ask me. That's love. You're staring at a burnt steak. You bite the bullet and you clean your plate. Then you go on and on about how great it was. Well, that's not a lie, that's love. The best marriage love advice I can give you, I would tell in each and every student who ever asked me, how do I show love to a woman? I'd say, just lie to her. I'm totally kidding. That's not what I would say. But I have had a lot of students ask me, like, how do you go about, like, talking to the girl or the boy that you like? Or how do you know when it's love? And we try and figure out how to answer that question. Maybe you've had that question asked of you at some point, and you finally give up, and you just say, you just know. And that doesn't work for them at all. I had a Wednesday night community group with our high schoolers on this past Wednesday. And I don't know how the conversation got to it, but at some point, we were talking about, this is what it was. We were talking about weaknesses that we have in our lives. And several of the guys say that they are just not good at talking to girls. And so I gave them the amazing love expert advice of when you see that girl that you like and you're sitting next to her in school, just look at her and go, I love Jesus. Because at that point, you get the most important conversation out of the way, and she's either going to look at you and go, you're creepy, and you're not going to get anywhere, or she's going to go, I love him too. And you've already set a foundation. They all looked at me like, yeah, I think I'll just tell her I like her hair. So I don't know. I thought I was doing pretty good. But love it's a huge conversation that we have. It's a huge part of our lives, whether it's love between a man and a woman or a family member or someone sitting down the row from you right here in church. Love is a big conversation that we have, and I think of weddings that we go to over and over again. Most of us have probably been to a wedding at some point in our lives, and we sit there and we watch this couple standing on a platform, or maybe it's outside in the grass, or wherever it may be. We see this couple, and at some point during this wedding, we look up there, and they're looking at each other, and they're staring each other in the eyes. And the pastor's back here, and he's saying all this stuff, and they're like, yeah, whatever. They don't hear anything he or she is saying. And the guy's looking there, and he's not listening to it because all he's thinking is, you're hot. And the woman's sitting over here, and she's going, what am I doing? And neither one of them is listening to the pastor at all. And then they get to this point where it's time to share their vows. And some of them write their own, and some of them quote something that the pastor's saying. But they usually get to this point where they're looking at each other and they're saying, and I will love you in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, till death do us part, for rich or for poor. That's totally out of order. I haven't actually officiated a wedding yet. But they go through and they list all of these things that they're going to, and truly, people are sitting there and going, they've got no idea. They're insisting there's never going to be a fight, but they might have one on the way to their honeymoon after they leave this thing, and it's all going to become really real, really fast. But the couple's sitting there, and they're just totally innocent. And then the pastor finally gets to a point where he pulls out Scripture, and he opens it up to the great Hallmark card, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which a lot of people don't realize is actually in the Bible. Hallmark did not come up with it. But in 1 Corinthians 13, and again, the couple's standing there, and they're not listening to a single word of this, but everybody else is hearing it at least somewhat. And the pastor reads, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable. And it keeps, I reminded my wife of this one on Tuesday, it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. And all the ladies in the place are, oh, it's so beautiful. Oh, these guys, oh, they're so cute. And all the men in the place are going, man, it is dusty in here. There's like dirt everywhere. Oh my goodness. And we start to define love as all of these things. It may be Brad Paisley saying, hey, just, don't tell each other the truth all the time. You gotta kind of skim over things and tell those little white lies to keep everybody happy. And you just got to do whatever you can to keep those warm, fuzzy, ooey, gooey, chocolatey feelings inside of you. Guys buy chocolate. That one will help too. But you got to do all those things, and it'll keep that feeling inside of you. But if we look at 1 Corinthians 13, I'm about to blow it up. Like, love isn't not those things. Like, there is emotion in love, especially when it's in a marriage or a family or whatever it is. There is emotion involved in it, but we all know that there are times where I don't want to be kind to my spouse, and I don't want to be patient with my spouse or with my children or with that person sitting down the row. I don't want to have all of these things. So the emotion, the fuzzy-wuzzy feeling kind of starts to go away, and we don't really feel that for them, but we know that we're supposed to continue to love them anyway. So we look at 1 Corinthians 13 and we read those, but so often 1 Corinthians 13 is taken, I think, out of context. I mean, love is patient and love is kind, and it doesn't keep record of wrongs. That's not false, but we don't stop and look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and 1 Corinthians chapter 14 to see what's surrounding this great love chapter that shows up in so many weddings that we come across. In 1 Corinthians 12 and 14, Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and he is talking in those chapters about how we have gifts that God has given us. That we have a special gifting that the Spirit has put on our lives that God expects us to use to serve people. That God expects us to use to glorify Him as we are reaching out to the people around us. And then in the middle of those two chapters, he talks about love. When he's talking about love in 1 Corinthians 13, he's not just talking about the love that we have for that significant person in our lives. He's talking about how we go about using the gifts that God has put inside of us. That we use those gifts in a manner of love. Which sounds awesome and is cool and we should do it, but we sit there and we're like, well, what does that even mean? I mean, if love is not just this emotion inside of me, then what is love? And there is no better person that we could ever look at. As great as Brad Paisley is at writing songs, there is no greater person that we can look at than Jesus Christ to figure out what it means to love another person. Because as much as I love each and every one of you, and I say that from the bottom of my heart, I don't have the same kind of feelings for you as I have for my beautiful wife. Or even for my two little children. It is a different type of love. You would feel incredibly awkward if I felt and displayed the same kind of love for you that I display and feel for my wife. And you would probably never come back, or you would get me to never come back, which would mean I would be out of a job, and then it would be a lot harder to love you. So this whole cycle would start to happen. But in John chapter 21, as I was praying about this, God directed me to this passage. In John chapter 21, Peter and Jesus are having a conversation. But to give you some context of what's going on here, several chapters in our Bible earlier, but several days earlier in actual reality, Peter and Jesus had been having a different conversation. And Peter had told Jesus during this conversation that, I will follow you anywhere, Lord. I will follow you even unto death. And many times we look at that and we're like, okay, we know the rest of the story. We know that he didn't actually follow Jesus unto death when Jesus was arrested, because we know the part of the story where Peter, when Jesus is arrested, he tucks tail and he runs. And he stays kind of nearby, close enough that people are looking at him being like, hey, weren't weren't you one of those guys that was hanging out with Jesus and following him? And we know the part of the story where Peter's sitting there going, no, it wasn't me. You're crazy. You're hanging out in Colorado too long, and you're doing stuff down there that you shouldn't be doing. Youth pastor, I can get away with that stuff. Not doing that stuff. I can get away with saying that stuff. Woo! And this might be the last time I ever get to speak. But that same guy, we give him a hard time because we know that he did that. But I believe that when Peter looked at Jesus and said, I will follow you unto death, he meant it, and he would have done it if it would have been the type of death that he thought he was talking about when he was talking to Jesus. Because he thought that Jesus was getting ready to start a revolution with a military and to go into battle to gain their freedom back from the oppressors that they had in their lives. And so just like an armyman, a military man or woman would go to their commander and say, I will follow you unto death to fight for the freedom that we are here to fight for. Peter is looking at Jesus and say, I will follow you unto death to fight for the freedom. And then when he realizes Jesus isn't doing this, he gets out of there. But we fast forward a little bit, and Jesus has gone to the cross. Jesus has died for the sins of everyone. And then he has been risen from the dead. And the disciples at this point have gone back to what they know how to do, which for some of them, that means they went back to fishing. And so they're sitting in a boat and they're fishing and they're not having any luck whatsoever until this guy comes to the shore and he shouts out to them, hey, throw your nets over onto the other side of the boat. And for those of you in Wyoming who know how to fish, which is a lot of you, if you had somebody on the shore who's not in a boat, who doesn't know what they're talking about, telling you to do something different, you would think, who is that idiot telling me how to fish? He's not even out here. But to the disciples' credit, they weren't like a lot of us, and they did what was told, and they eventually figured out that this is Jesus. And when they figured that out, Peter immediately jumps into the water, swims over to the shore, and gets to Jesus before the boat can get there. We go a little bit farther on, and they've had breakfast, and then we run into John chapter 21, and beginning in verse 15, where it says, after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? If my wife of 10 years were to come up to me and say, Justin, do you love me? With my words, I would wax the greatest Hallmark card that you could ever come across. I would be the sweetest, saying all the right things. Babe, you know. I call her babe. Babe, you know, because she is one. Babe, you know that I love you with everything inside of me, that I would give my life for you. But in my mind, I've been thinking, what did I do wrong? Why is she asking me this question? Did I leave my dirty underwear on the floor? Did I not put the dishes in the sink? Did I forget to go pick up that thing at the store that I still don't remember what it was that she wanted me to get in the first place? Why is she asking me this question? So Peter, when this question is asked of him, I imagine there was some of that running through his head like, oh no, he knows. He knows. But in his words, Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus doesn't respond like we would think, but he says, then feed my lambs. And Jesus repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know I love you. Then take care of my sheep. And a third time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now Peter was hurt that Jesus had asked him the question the third time. And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus replied, then feed my sheep. This is a little freebie for you. This isn't part of this morning's message. But I don't want it to be missed on us that in 3 times Jesus came to him and said, Peter, do you love me? The act of restoration that Jesus performs in that moment, as he's looking at someone who denied ever even knowing him, and says, Peter, do you love me? He knew that Peter loved him. But he had some words to share unto Peter, and he had some restoration to do in Peter's life and in Peter's heart. And so he asks him this, but then his response to Peter isn't Oh, man, I'm so glad. That makes me feel so much better that you love me. It wasn't this emotion that came through Jesus at that moment. It wasn't even all right, man, then bring it in. We got to give a bro hug here. I'm so glad you love me. Give him the double pat on the back, because anything more than that is just, can't do it. No, he says, feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Feed my lambs. I've never been a shepherd. I've helped herd some cattle from time to time, but I've never taken care of sheep. But I have talked to a lot of people smarter than me who know what it takes to herd sheep and to tend sheep and to take care of sheep. And that when the sheep are hungry and they're eating the grass all the way down to the very bottom, they're not smart enough to move on to the next pasture by themselves, but the shepherd has to come along and move them to the next pasture. The sheep aren't smart enough to realize that when one sheep walks off of a cliff and falls to his death, a nasty death below him, that I probably should not follow after him. So the shepherd has to make sure that they're not all walking off a cliff when they walk up to one. A shepherd has to be there to watch out for them when the other animals are coming in that want to destroy them and want to kill them, and he has to be there to protect them in those moments. A shepherd has to shear the sheep so that they don't overheat when it gets too hot outside. Being a shepherd, tending sheep, feeding sheep is a constant job that never stops, and it's dirty and it's thankless so much of the time. But Jesus looks at Peter and says, I want you to be a shepherd to my people. Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Tend my lambs. Take care of my people if you love me. Because we see, and this is in your notes, and I know your notes, if you're following along in those, they are not in order because I don't really follow notes, and it was really hard for me to even come up with something to put in a bulletin. But if you're following in your notes, you see that love is not just an emotion that we have inside. And Jesus begins to show this to Peter, that love is not just this feeling that you have inside, but love is serving one another and taking action. Much like, here's the song that I sang to Sarah last night. That this song, I think, captures it a lot closer. And I'm just going to play a little bit of this for you. But how we show love is by taking care of people where they're at. The great Adam Sandler wrote this one. I want to make you smile whenever you're sad. Carry you around when your arthritis is bad. All I want to do is grow old with you. I'll get you medicine when your tummy aches. Build you a fire when the furnace breaks. So it would be so nice growing old with you. So I'll miss you, I'll kiss you. Don't do that with everybody you come across. That part would be weird. Give you, unless you're French, give you my coat when you are cold. Need you, I'll feed you. Even let you hold the remote control. Let me do the dishes in our kitchen sink. Put you to bed when you've had too much to drink. Oh, I could be the man, milkshakes of course, who grows old with you. I want to grow old with you. See, in that song, Adam Sandler thank you. Adam Sandler catches the fact that to love people, we take care of them in their need. And now, I love the line in there where he's talking about how I'll carry you around when your arthritis is bad. That doesn't have to be a man and a woman that are taking care of each other in old age. That can be a younger person that's taking care of an older person who's having difficulty getting around or just difficulty taking care of things in their home. Or the line where he says, I'll carry you to bed when you've had too much to drink, which I usually switch to milkshakes, and I forgot on that one. But that could be that there is a young person in your life who has a tendency to overdose on sugar that you are there to take care of when they're feeling sick. That could be something like fostering a child or even adopting a child or showing love to your very own child. Or maybe it's mentoring a child. Maybe it's serving on Wednesday nights or Sunday mornings in children's ministry. There's all sorts of different ways that we show this, but we begin to see that love is serving and taking action, and serving is so much more than just giving of our money. 2 weeks ago, we had an amazing Faith Promise weekend where we had pledges come in. That you saw the number, I think it was like, $463,000 that was pledged to missions, which is absolutely awesome, but it doesn't stop there. Because while those things are great and we need those organizations to do what we can't do, and we can give of our money, it's not that giving money is not part of serving people and taking care of people. It's that it's not all there is to taking care of people and to serving people. In Matthew chapter 25, one of my favorite passages in all of Scripture that I don't know how many students I've shared this with, adults I've shared this with, but in Matthew 25, Jesus is talking and he says, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then these righteous ones will reply, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? Or a stranger and show you hospitality? Or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will say, I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me. So we saw Jesus talking to Peter and telling him that if you want to love me, then take care of my people. And now we see Jesus saying that when you do something for those who are out there who are hurting, then you are taking care of me and you are loving me. For the past 4 out of the past 5 weeks, other than Faith Promise Weekend, we've been going through a series called Shaken. And how when we go through a time in our life that just rocks our world and just upends everything that we know, or some difficult situation comes on, how we can stand firm in the faith and not have our entire faith and our entire being just crumble down around us as we are shaken underneath the burdens that this life puts upon us. But the truth is that some of us are able to listen to that message and say, I need to remember that for later, because right now, my life is really good. And I don't have this big struggle going on in my life or this big burden on my shoulders. And that is awesome. Praise God in the moment that you are in. Remember those words for when you know that something's going to come up in your life. But remember that those around you may not be having the same great moments in life that you're having right now. That there may be someone sitting 2 rows in front of you or 3 rows behind you who is going through a serious trial in their life. And God is saying, I gave you specific gifts so that you can help out that person with the things that they are going through right now. Or like I said, maybe God's given you specific gifts so that you can help out a student who is just getting picked on at school or who got a bad grade, and they need an adult to tell them that it's going to be okay, that life goes on from here, and you can help them build in their faith as they go through that moment. The truth is that we can't do everything, but we can do something. And what we're supposed to do for one person may not be the same thing that we're supposed to do for another one. That's why I don't think it was an accident, because nothing with Jesus ever is, that he used more than one verb when he's talking to Peter, and he says, feed my sheep and tend my sheep, because it's not always going to be the same thing. The sheep don't always need food, and you don't force food down the throat of somebody who is full. When he's going in Matthew 25 and he's talking about what you do for the least of these, you do for me, he says that when I was hungry, you gave me food. Not when I was hungry, you gave me clothes, and when I was naked, you gave me something to drink. But he says you met my need where I was at in that moment. You weren't able to do everything, but you were able to meet one need in that moment. My mom taught me many, many great lessons, and she continues to teach me many great lessons, and this is all recorded, so she gets to see this, which is really good. But one of the things my mom taught me was that she can't do everything, but she can do something. When my uncle, 7 or 8 years ago, I'm terrible with time frames, it might have actually been longer than that. My uncle was a pilot who had his own plane, And one day he decided, his family was down in southern Oregon, and he had to stay behind for some reason or another, and he was going to go join them. And the weather was beautiful where he was taking off, and the weather was beautiful where he was landing. So he thought, instead of driving down there today, I'm going to fly down there because this will be a great way to spend my day. And so my uncle took off in northern Oregon, and he began his flight down in the southern parts of Oregon. And the weather was great when he started, but about halfway between, there was a heavy, heavy fog that he found himself flying into. And we don't really know exactly what happened, but the investigators say that their best guess is that the mechanical parts of his plane and the instruments in his plane ceased working. And so the phone call that we got was that several hours after the accident had happened, they had found my uncle's plane, to where their best guess is that he had been killed upon impact when he hit the ground that he never saw coming because the fog was that thick. And his instrument panels weren't working to tell him how high up off the ground he was. When my mom got that call, my mom lives in Kansas. This was happening in Oregon. When my mom got that call, there wasn't a hesitation. It was, I need to be there for my sister. So she got herself out to Oregon, and she wrapped her sister in her arms, and she let her sister cry, my aunt cry, with her. She couldn't do everything. There were no words that my mom was going to be able to say in that moment. There wasn't anything that she was going to do that was going to make my aunt feel better in that moment. But what she could do was she could be there. Last year, another one of my uncles who all of my growing up years was this big, tall, strong man who loved to play golf and racquetball and lead worship. He led worship at a church down in Oklahoma City. He was the chairman of the music department at Mid-America, where I went to school for years and years. He actually retired the year I got there, which I still haven't figured out if that was coincidence or if that was planned that he decided to retire the year I joined the music department. But this big, tall, strong man about 5-6 years ago, again, I'm terrible with dates and years and all that kind of stuff, but his body began to betray him, and he began to show signs of Parkinson's, but it wasn't Parkinson's, and so they were trying to figure out what's wrong with him, and they couldn't figure it out no matter what tests they were running or whatever it was. And over the 5 or 6 or 7 years, however long it was, his body just continued to deteriorate until the point last year where he was in a wheelchair, hunched over, couldn't sit himself up, having to have a board on the side of the wheelchair in order to keep himself upright, had to be fed through a tube, had to be cleaned up after he went to the bathroom. You couldn't understand the words that were coming out of his mouth. You knew that he was still glorifying God and that he was still cracking jokes. You just didn't know what the jokes were anymore. Until last year, when his life finally gave out. And when my mom got that call, she immediately called her work. She works for the post office. She immediately called her work and said, I need some days off. Knowing that Christmas was coming up, and we were all coming into town this last year, so knowing that she was going to use up vacation days and she was going to miss out on some time with her boys and her daughters-in-law and all of her grandkids while we were all there, she knew she needed to take some days off at the last minute, and she drove down to Oklahoma City and just held her sister. In fact, that's where she was when I first talked to her. That's how quickly my mom got down there. When I found out that my uncle had passed, my mom was already there taking care of my aunt. She had no words to say. We saw this one coming. His health was deteriorating over years and years, but many of you know that no matter how prepared you are, it's still hard when the day comes. She couldn't do everything, but she could do something. You can't do everything for everyone in your life who has something going on, but there's somebody in your community group, there's somebody in your family, there's somebody sitting in these seats today that needs you to use the gift that God put in your life in order to show them love. And he may be saying that I need to use you to help keep that person from having their faith crumble around them, to help keep that person from being so shaken that they walk away from me. I've given you a gift to help out in that situation. That in Matthew 25, it actually continues on, and it talks about how there were people who didn't do any of those things. They also didn't know that they were just not doing them for Jesus. But Jesus tells them in the end that those who did those things for me, for the least of these, will be spending eternity with my Father in heaven, and those who didn't will not be spending eternity with my Father in heaven. Those are heavy words. That if we ignore loving other people, and he reiterates this in Matthew chapter 22, which is just a couple chapters before what we just read. In Matthew 22, in verses 37 and 40, somebody has asked Jesus what the most important command is, because they want to know what's the most and the least that I need to do in order to follow God and to be in good standing. And Jesus responds with this: you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. And in Luke, it adds in all your strength. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. So often we look at that and we can memorize so easily, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And we can quote that off. And we say, and the second one is to love your neighbor as yourself. And we forget a word in there, or two words in there, that we cannot graze over and we cannot ignore. And that is that he says the second one is equally important. So here's loving God. And he doesn't say that loving others is down here some way. He says here's loving God, and loving others is right here. It's 1A and 1B. We cannot love God and not love other people. God tells us, Jesus tells us that if you want to love me, you must love the people that I've put in your life. You must love the people that are walking on this earth with you. Sometimes that's hard because I don't have warm feelings for everybody that I come across. And I don't have any kind of emotional attachment to them, but Jesus tells me that I'm supposed to love them, and that is just as important as loving God. See, it's easy to come in here on Sunday morning or Saturday night, whichever service you prefer to go to, and maybe catch a community group and be involved there, and maybe go to a Bible study, and then when you come in here, you're singing worship songs, and you're listening to the speaker, and you're giving of your tithe and your offerings and all those things. It's easy to do all of those things and to say, I love you, God, and to come in here and to sing the songs that are all about how I love God, and they're great songs. I'm not taking anything away from that, and all of those things are great and they're important to do, but it's easy to limit it to that and say, I love God, look what I do. And God's saying, if you love me, go beyond all of that. Don't just come on Sunday morning. Don't just go to community groups. Don't just give your tithe. Don't just sing songs to me. If you love me, take care of my sheep. And that becomes difficult. And those of us who have gotten to that point where we've been able to tell someone we love them, we know that love is difficult. And loving God takes time, and it takes work, and it gets us dirty all the time. Because the messes that people have going on in their lives are dirty messes. And God's telling us we need to get involved in all of those. So we can come in here and we can sing those songs, and we can even mean them with the emotions inside of us. But if we are not acting out the love that God tells us to act out, then we are not loving God. I can tell you that I can tell my wife with my words all I want that I love her. And I can say it like the Hallmark cards that we can find down at the store. I can say all those things, but if I don't show her that I love her, if I don't occasionally put the girls to bed by myself so that she can have the relaxing evening, if I don't do all of those things, if I don't serve my wife, then all of those words are completely worthless. I see a lot of married heads kind of going like this right now. Mostly women for some reason. I don't know why that is. It's a difficult pill to swallow when we realize that we can't love God without loving other people. As a pastor, it's easy for me to come up here and say this. And in many ways, it's easy for me to do this because my job literally requires that I love people and that I take care of people. But the difficult part comes into it when I realize that I can't just limit that to my job. I can't just do it on the moments that I'm on the clock, so to speak, even though there is no clock in ministry. But to limit it to that, to limit it to when Mary gives me a call and says, hey, so-and-so needs to talk to you, and so I'm willing to talk to her or talk to the person on the phone or whatever it is. It's easy to limit it to that and say, God, I love you and I love other people. Just look at what I did today. And then to go home and to ignore the actual physical neighbor that I have in the cul-de-sac and not ever actually do anything to meet their needs. So I understand that this is not easy stuff to hear. So often I think it's easy to look up and say, well, the pastor's got that easy. And we do in some ways, but in other ways it's very difficult. And we have the same struggles because we have to do this all the time too, not just some of the time. But Jesus, being who he was, didn't just tell us to do this. Jesus set the example himself on how to do this. He practiced what he preached, so to speak. In John chapter 15, beginning in verse 12, I know it's up there, but I like reading it out of here. So hold on, because I lost my spot. In John chapter 15, beginning in verse 12, Jesus says this, "This is my commandment, love each other in the same way that I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends." Love each other in the same way that I have loved you. Meaning love isn't just going out and giving hugs and kisses and saying nice things to each other, because Jesus came and Jesus served people. Jesus came and he healed the sick, he healed the blind, he healed the lame, he raised people from the dead, he fed those who were hungry. He took care of people's needs where they were at in those moments. He could do everything, but he started by just doing something in so many people's lives. And he's telling us that you need to do the exact same thing. Maybe it's going down to the Wyoming Rescue Mission and it's feeding people down there. Maybe it's going into prisons and it's visiting people there. Maybe it's volunteering at CR on Friday nights. Maybe it's volunteering in youth or children's or getting on a worship team or hospitality where we have greeters and ushers. There's all sorts of different gifts that people are giving. It may be in the church, it may be out of the church, but God is saying that Jesus is saying that you need to love people the same way that I have loved you. And there is no greater love than to lay down your life for a friend. And most of us in here are never going to be asked to literally lay down our life for somebody else. To literally lay down my life for the person that I love. Some of us will, but most of us aren't ever going to come to that point. But perhaps what Jesus is saying is that for those of you who aren't going to have to lay down your actual life, you need to lay down the life that you have put on a platform, that you have made yourself more important in the things that you do, and you need to come down amongst the people. That you need to give up some of the comforts that you have in your life and meet people with all the stuff and the messiness that's going on in their life and show them love where they are at in this exact moment. Laying down a life doesn't mean that we literally have to die, but we do have to die to ourselves so that we can serve God and we can love him by serving other people. You can't do everything, church, but you can do something. And God has given you the ability to do something really good. The question is, will you use it? Will you say, God, you've given me a gift, and so I want to use that to bless you and to bless other people? Or will you ignore it and just say, I love you, God, because I sing that I love you. I love you, God, because I come to church. I love you, God, because I give my tithe. When God's saying, I just want you to get dirty. I just want you to do something. God, thank you for not only showing us how to love. Lord, we apologize for how we have turned love into something so much less so often, because we know that it's more than an emotion inside of us. But God, I thank you for not only telling us how to love, but for showing us how to do it and for setting the example yourself so that we can't look at you and say, well, that was easy for him to say. He didn't ever have to do it, because you did it, Lord. God, you went to the cross for us. and you died for us, and you healed and you served people. You got down on your knees and you washed your disciples' feet to serve them. Lord, I pray that you would give us the strength and encouragement, because it's not easy and it goes against everything that our culture so often tells us, to get down and get dirty and to take ourselves off of the pedestal, to take ourselves off of the platform, to die to ourselves so that we can love other people for you. Lord, help us to do that. Give us that strength. God, we love you and we thank you for the gift that you gave us when you went to that cross. Lord, if there is anyone in here who feels like they need to turn to you this morning, Lord, I pray that you would make that so evident inside their lives that they would not be able to leave this place without doing so. Lord, it is so amazing that you want us to love you by loving others. Amen.